there's like lots of people, like American so-called veterans. I call them ex-imperial soldiers because that's what they are. The term veteran is very positively loaded in American society, and it's extended to other countries as well. So a lot of like ex-imperial soldiers get very angry at me for basically daring to ascribe any blame to them for joining up with the US imperial war machine and either directly helping to like murder people in order to further its imperialism, or indirectly helping to murder people by like, being like a medic who's there in order to treat the soldiers of the killing, or like a cook who's there to cook for the soldiers who are doing the killing. Obviously a military needs far more people who support its campaign of imperialist violence than it does people actually carrying out the imperialist violence. So there's multiple layers here of complicity. So let's talk about that. Lots of these people complain about me like I'm their boogeyman, basically. And before continuing, let's narrow down the scope of what we're talking about here. Because, there's different kinds of militaries in the world, in that most of them literally do nothing. Most of them are just there to hold a parade once a year while idiots wave flags around, and they don't do anything. They're just there kind of for show, maybe to be able to posture a little bit against maybe a potential hypothetical one-day threat of another country maybe invading them one day. But there are lots of countries that are very unambiguously just imperialist, and they use their military as such, and everyone knows it. You can just take a look at them and ask, what is this military for? And you know it, because you can just look at what they've done recently and in very recent history. Like the US, for example, what is the US military for? Maintaining American geopolitical hegemony abroad through mass violence. And that's what they do. What is the Israeli military for? They are an armed-to-the-teeth colonial police force designed to terrorize Palestinians. Very simple. What is the Australian military for? To just follow the US military around in whatever they do. Therefore, you're the same as a US soldier. Same stuff, right? So that's what we're talking about here. Not like anyone who joins any military. Like, if you want to join the Cuban military and participate in a parade once a year, and other than that, just sit in your barracks waiting for a US invasion that's never going to come, I mean, whatever. It's obviously different to like joining the US military, which could potentially result in you directly supporting an actual, like, illegal, immoral armed conflict, which directly results in the mass murder of people in the third world, as many of their very recent armed conflicts have. And even if you don't actually see combat, the fact that you join up and are ready to see combat or support it at a moment's notice is a part of US imperialism, because having the military at the ready is obviously a huge part of their power projection, of why they exist. Every military, even the US military, would rather get what they want without actually exercising the violence. They need you there to be the threat of violence, to be a part of that threat of violence, to force other countries or whatever to do what they want without actually having to fire a shot. So yeah, if you join the US military, you are part of that. You're part of a machine explicitly designed to murder for imperialism. Let's look at my post that I made today. And this is something that I know is going to hurt a lot of people, especially American so-called military veterans, they call themselves, because it's going to hit very close to home, because a lot of them believe themselves to essentially have no free will whatsoever for some reason. Like essentially they frame themselves as innocent victims who are honestly as much, if not more, victims than their actual victims. Like, they legitimately seem to believe that them joining the military voluntarily and then going and shooting people in Iraq puts them on the same level of victimhood as the people who they shot. And it's insane. So let's look at this. So it's possible to be someone who was formerly in the military of one of these countries where you should not be in the military. Okay, there's no excuse for doing so. But first, it's absolutely not okay to have joined that military if you're doing it after you're already supposedly a leftist. Like, you're already politically engaged. You already are asking these questions like, is it okay for us to join the military? Unambiguously, because then at that point, you don't have the excuse of ignorance, right? You don't have the excuse of, I joined up when I was young and naive, I believed the propaganda, and now I realize it was all bullshit. Because you should have known better beforehand. If you're already politically engaged beforehand, you're already asking questions like, should I join the military or not? Is it moral to join the military or not? Beforehand. You don't have that anymore. But if you are legitimately just ignorant, and I think, in the day and age that we live in, where if you live in one of these countries, you have access to a massive plethora of information. And if you're not looking up what the military that you're thinking about joining is for before joining it, looking up what it's done, then I think, you must just be really stupid, or you must just be trying to actively mislead yourself. But either way, I'm willing to accept, for the sake of argument, the premise that you can just be ignorant and propagandized, and apparently just not know how to look at Wikipedia. So let's accept that premise. So let's say you're ignorant. You got in, you're ignorant, and then while in the military, you're like, man, this is kind of bullshit. The military sucks. What we're doing here is wrong. Great. Good work. I mean, not good work, because it would be better if you didn't join in the first place, but at least you're realizing it. However, in doing this, you aren't the victim. You joined up into this military for personal gain. You wanted to get paid, you wanted better career opportunities, you wanted to, get a college education or something, whatever, or healthcare or something, whatever. You might have had material motivations, but having material motivations outside of just wanting to kill people doesn't mean that you didn't do something bad. A robber also has material motivations. Someone who kills their neighbor to steal the life savings they have hidden under the bed also has material motivations. They want to better their life. They want to make more money. They want to be able to pay for college. They want to be able to pay for healthcare. You wouldn't defend that, so you can't defend it here, okay? It's the same sort of thing. So that's what I said here. People who join these sorts of militaries do so to be hitmen for racist imperialism, hoping to benefit from it. The victims are those on the other end, not them because they choose to kill or support killing in the name of imperial expansion for free college or whatever, rather than just working a normal job and not killing anyone, okay? If your choice is between becoming a hitman for US imperialism and working a job that pays you less than that, maybe just work the job that pays you less than that, okay? It's really not controversial to say that. And that you offered more money in order to do something that is obviously incredibly fucked up isn't a justification for doing that thing. It might explain it, it might be oh, so this is why people join the military, but explaining why they joined the military, explaining the incentives that they had to do so, isn't the same thing as saying they have no responsibility for doing so. They obviously do. It's the same thing as saying, well, crime happens, for example, violent crime happens because poverty means that, more people are materially desperate and more likely to do something like shoot someone in the head and steal their wallet or something, okay? That doesn't mean that it wasn't wrong for them to shoot someone in the head and steal their wallet. It just means that the reason why that happened is linked to poverty, and that we can fight that by lowering poverty. It doesn't mean that what they did is morally okay, that they're not responsible for it. I made the comparison here to joining, say, the US military and going to shoot people or support people who are shooting people across the globe in the name of furthering US imperial goals is the same arrangement that any random contract killer has. Murdering for personal advancement or supporting murder for personal advancement. And honestly, that you're doing it for imperialism is worse. There's no moral difference between you as a willing, voluntary imperial soldier or an Israeli conscript, for example, who could just spend a year in prison rather than going to brutalize the Palestinians in the West Bank. There's no moral difference between that and being a common murderer, okay? There's no moral difference whatsoever. So this is the place where these supposedly leftist veterans fall over at the first hurdle. They simply cannot even admit the most basic facts about what they did, what they were. They would not even acknowledge the things that I'm saying about themselves. They would come up with all of these roundabout non-excuses and non-comparisons. For example, but you pay taxpayer dollars, and the taxpayer dollars fund the military. You're exactly the same as me.
If you don't trust the CIA, then who do you trust?
Do you understand the difference between non-voluntarily having to pay taxes and voluntarily joining the military to directly support or participate in the imperialist invasions of other countries, the destructions of their societies and economies, and the murder of many of their people? Do you understand the difference between that? You do. Don't pretend you don't. You do. Okay? Very simple. Just one of the sorts of excuses they come up with. So if you want to be a leftist veteran or whatever, the key is first acknowledging that you did something bad. Just as anyone else who did something bad in their life, that is obviously not in line with their purported principles, should be able to acknowledge and admit if they want to move forward. The first step to being able to be reformed and rehabilitated is acknowledging the thing that you need to be reformed and rehabilitated from. If you can't pass this first hurdle, you're obviously not even remotely a leftist, okay? Another thing is this is often framed, especially supposed anti-imperialists in the US, veterans especially, like to frame the tragedy of their imperialism, of their militarism, not so much as them murdering people for the sake of American imperialism, destroying their countries, etc., but rather as something that is bad because of what it costs the US. Because American soldiers die. Because it costs American taxpayers a lot of money. No, that's not why it's bad. That's not even remotely why it's bad. I don't give a shit about homeless veterans. I don't fucking care. Okay? Being like, oh, it's so sad that we have homeless veterans. A homeless veteran isn't any more worthy than any other homeless person of not being homeless. In fact, if anything, they're more deserving of that status than others, because they did heinous shit for personal gain. And it seems like the personal gain that they had expected wasn't actually there as much as they had hoped for. Too fucking bad, my man. Too fucking bad. It's like a hitman being scammed. I don't fucking care. This is the problem, too, with the way that they frame this. They frame themselves as victims. A lot of the time, their opposition to the military really isn't even like a moral or a material objection to what the military does. It's that their end of the deal wasn't upheld. The problem with what you did, what your military does, and what you have participated in or supported is what it does to your victims, your almost entirely victims in the global south, countries that are also just in general exploited by your imperialism. Not that your taxpayer dollars were misspent, not that the poor veterans have ended up with PTSD or whatever without adequate support afterwards. It's another thing that you need to get into your head if you want to even remotely be a leftist veteran. It's like focusing on the trauma of like Nazi soldiers rather than on the Holocaust. If you wouldn't accept it there, you shouldn't accept that here. Now, let's say that you're an ex-imperial soldier, a so-called veteran, and you acknowledge everything that I just said. So you know that you're not a victim. You know that you were in fact a victimizer. You know that even if you think you might have had, material reasons that pushed you into doing this, you still should have said no. And the second that you realized that what you were doing was bad and unjustifiable, hopefully you left. And hopefully now you realize all of this. Like you realize that you're basically like, you're not anyone special. You're like someone who has done something bad in their life that they deeply regret, just like that, right? Being a veteran isn't a special thing. It doesn't give you any credit. It shouldn't give you any credit. As if anything, it's worse. Joining the US military for 3 years or whatever is worse than sitting in your room for 3 years and masturbating to anime, doing absolutely nothing on your mom's dime. You legitimately did infinitely worse for the world, for human beings, than that person did. So to hold it up as something special about yourself is massive bullshit. And that's what I said here. So let's move on to step 2. Stop identifying as a veteran. That's the next thing you need to do. It's pathetic enough when right-wingers do it, when some fucking loser who joined the military, because he wanted all of the clout that comes with it in American society, spends the rest of his life saying, yeah, I was a hoo-ah US Marine, with literally no other facet of his personality. That's already bad enough. It's even worse when you do it while claiming to be a leftist, okay? So, particularly in societies like the USA, Israel, whatever, where military worship is incredibly common for obvious reasons, and you are a leftist ex-imperial soldier and you flaunt the veteran label. You identify as a veteran. You throw it into your fucking Twitter bio. You mention it at every opportunity. You get your little veteran discount every chance you can. You even go to fucking France probably when you're on holiday there and ask for a veteran discount. I know you guys do that. You form communities like special clubs for leftist vets. You clearly consider this label to be like a fundamental part of your identity and something that is positive, something that you deserve, like something in exchange for, either from the state, you think that you deserve healthcare benefits, you deserve college education, or from other people, like you should be respected, your political opinion should be taken with more weight because you are a veteran. No. Your political opinion should be taken with less weight, if anything, because you are a veteran, okay? You shouldn't have any benefit because of what you did. You've already taken enough from the crimes that you've committed. You've already profited enough, and it's an absolute miracle that you're never going to be punished for that. You should be thankful for that every single day. You definitely shouldn't be positively identifying as a leftist veteran, like frothing at the fucking mouth for a chance to be like, yep, I was a vet. Yeah, war is hell, war is bad, but I'm a proud veteran. It's like putting in your Twitter bio, leftist hitman, former leftist cartel enforcer. Like, it's really no different. It's possibly even worse. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Honestly, have you ever thought about this for a second? Proud leftist murderer, strangled 2 women on Route 77 back in 1989. There's no fucking difference. Maybe the guy who strangled 2 women in 1979 could one day be reformed and be released into society, like with genuine remorse, like wondering how the fuck they ever got to the point that they could do that to another human being and like crying in agony whenever they think about it. And maybe you, as someone who went and served in Iraq and shot at like kids shooting back at you defending their own country, maybe you could have remorse for it in the same way. But I can't imagine that murderer holding up him being a former murderer as something positive in the same way that you do your actions, which are morally very similar, okay? Materially also very similar, if not worse. So yeah, like, if you throw the veteran label around proudly at all, and especially in leftist communities, as if you should be put up on a pedestal and entitled to extra clout for it, then you clearly are not actually remorseful at all for what you did. If anything, you think that you should be entitled to benefits for it, to special treatment for it. If you were truly remorseful for being an imperial hitman, you wouldn't be doing that. You wouldn't be using the fact that you committed awful crimes for awful reasons as a core part of your identity and like beat people over the fucking head with it like it makes you special, okay? That should be uncontroversial. Like the way that so-called leftist veterans seem to think that this works, like honestly, I've never encountered a single one of them who isn't like this. If there's any of them out there, I assume the reason why I haven't encountered them is just because I don't know, because they don't act like this. You know, they do what I'm saying here. They basically just hide it until it's directly relevant, until it's incredibly relevant. Like, you know, the only point where it makes sense to be like, I was a leftist veteran is if like, you know, someone's talking about something directly related to the specific expertise that you gained from murdering people. You know, it's like, it would be like a Nazi scientist recruited by the USA or something being like, all the time, proud Nazi scientists. Like maybe their scientific expertise that they gained while working for the Nazis could possibly be relevant in some sort of discussion, but they probably shouldn't be holding it up every 2 seconds. They should be fucking thanking their lucky stars every 2 seconds that they're not in a jail cell, actually. Okay? So yeah, why are you flaunting the fact that you either went and invaded other countries, supported the invasions of other countries for imperialist reasons, or like at the very least were on call to do those things at any moment? Why would you hold that up as something positive about yourself? Obviously you shouldn't. There's nothing positive about that. You should regret it. So if you're holding it up, then you clearly are not an actual leftist in any way, shape, or form. You know, you're obviously not reformed if you still identify so strongly and positively with your status as what is essentially a criminal and use it to gain as much personal benefit and status as possible. And look, here's how I ended this, and I think it's very applicable. So let's say you were in the US military or the Israeli military, and you realize now that what you did was wrong. You know, if you were conscripted, you should have taken whatever hit, like a 1 year in a jail cell for Israel, or if you were a volunteer, you know, you fucked up, and you're not a victim for that. How do you handle that? Well, as anyone else who has developed as a person and who acknowledges that they've done something badly in their past should. You're just someone who has done something, you have actions in your past that you partook in that you regret. Simple, same as anyone else. Like maybe someone like punched their girlfriend or something once, and since then they've regretted it every single day of their life. You're like that. You're not special. You're not in some special category. You don't deserve special praise for being a leftist veteran. You're just someone who has done bad shit in their past that they regret, and you probably shouldn't talk about it every 2 seconds as if it makes you special. You probably shouldn't use it as some sort of cudgel to like gain clout or as a justification for you to be treated better than other people. So in that case, you're not a leftist veteran. You're a leftist who happens to have done something very bad in their past, which they acknowledge they were at fault for, and now deeply regret. But a leftist veteran, someone who proudly identifies as a leftist veteran and goes in like posts on leftist veteran communities, puts it in their biography everywhere, and proudly asks for their leftist veteran discount at Subway. No, you can't. A fundamental contradiction between being a leftist and being that sort of so-called veteran, okay? Impossible. Now let me address some arguments here, because this guy and some others in these comments had some very dumb responses. This guy says, "Good God, you're so clueless and ignorant yourself. Direct military members make up a small percentage of the US Armed Forces." I already explained that earlier. And it's like, so many people join because they have no other good career opportunity, and the vast majority of veterans make career in the trades. Spare us your feeble-mindedness that's incapable of or unwilling to understand people's motives for entering the military. This is fundamentally a conflation of motive with action. If you have a motive, you cannot be responsible. Now, no one accepts this. No one in any situation is like, oh, you had a motive that seemed rational to you for doing this, ergo you bear no responsibility for it. No one in any other situation would ever make this argument. Most murders are carried out with some sort of rational motive. But they're still murders. You're still responsible for them. Give me a break. My response to this was, like a quote, like a mocking quote. "Oh, I only joined the military to help the murder, not to pull the trigger myself. I just wanted a good job from helping the murder. I didn't do anything wrong." It's certainly telling how self-centered and morally bankrupt the average American is that they unironically seem to think "I did it for self-benefit" is some sort of all-absolving magic phrase. You got a good salary out of joining the military, which literally everyone knows is for killing, and then provided medical care to the direct murderers so they can go out and get back to murdering for genocidal imperialism faster. That a genocidal military requires non-combat support roles to enable it to do genocidal imperialism is not some sort of magical get-out-of-responsibility-free card for everyone involved. Why does the military need cooks to feed the murderers? Why does the military need mechanics to repair the murder machines? Why does the military need doctors to heal the murderers? Everyone who joins is an accomplice, and that you justify doing so with "but I wanted a good job" makes it worse, not better. Go and say to an Iraqi, "I participated in this invasion that destroyed your country, and I killed your family because I wanted free college." You're not going to get any remorse from me. I did nothing wrong. Actually, I'm going to constantly mention the fact that I did this as if it's something positive about me, and I'm going to get very angry and indignant if anyone tells me otherwise. Like, listen to yourselves, man. If you said this to anyone anywhere else in the world outside of the US or like fundamental massive beliefs in Western imperialism, you fucking laughed at. Especially if you said it to someone in one of your victim countries. Like, the only reason why these sorts of excuses might seem to work for you is because you're surrounded by other people who are fundamentally invested in the myth of American imperialism, in this myth that you had good intentions, you just, you were just misled, you poor little baby, and you're a victim yourself. This sort of denial is really exactly why these people should never be welcome in any remotely left movement. And they'll only be accepted in like the liberal faux left nationalist movement in the US. The first step to reform and rehabilitation is to even acknowledge that they need it, yet they can't even manage it. Then we had another genius here, just like reiterating the same thing, saying, "Oh, this is why bad empanada gets so much hate online." Instead of calling for more economic investment in regions where joining the military is the best career choice for the lower SES masses, he rails against those very people for joining a war machine. This statement is absolutely insane. What he's saying here is, these people don't bear responsibility for joining the military and going to murder people in other countries for US imperialism for their own personal gain. Rather, you bear responsibility for not advocating, to give them better jobs. For not, specifically, being an activist for them to get better jobs. It's fundamentally saying here, if you don't want me to join the military and go murder people, offer me more money. Outbid the US military. Otherwise, it's your fault. It's not my fault. It's somehow magically your fault. And that's what I said in my response here. What he said here is fundamentally, they can make good money from doing murder. Ergo, they bear absolutely no responsibility for doing so. And it's on you to give them better jobs if you think they shouldn't accept money to kill people in the third world. I cannot believe that anyone could accept this argument unless they're incredibly American. This is the most American argument I've ever seen. You can use this logic to justify literally anything, as long as there's some sort of personal benefit involved for the person who did it. Get an SS officer. Well, being an SS officer was the best paying job I had available to me. You want me to not be an SS officer? Well, give me a better job. Offer me more money. Otherwise, it's not me who's responsible for the Holocaust. It's you. So somehow responsibility for people making choices to do horrible things for personal benefit is magically shifted away from them and onto anyone who denounces them for their actions. So the way that these people act is fundamentally free will doesn't exist. Just because people have a limited spectrum of choice in capitalism, though as an American you have a much wider spectrum of choice than the vast majority of people in the world, by the way. But just because you have a limited spectrum of choice doesn't mean that you don't have a choice. Doesn't mean that you don't have any personal responsibility. You clearly fucking do. If your choice is join the military or go work a minimum wage job at Walmart, go do that. Obviously. Killing people for personal gain isn't justified regardless of how much you're getting out of it. Give me a fucking break. It's and as I said here, the sole concern with these people is with the imperial core, its people, and especially with themselves. The victims don't even factor into this equation for them. They're literally this guy's literally saying to me, you don't want me to kill third worlders for imperialism? Pay me more then. The US government is bidding more, so I'm going to go and do it. Fuck you, third worlders. You're not paying me more to not do it, so I'm going to go and do it. I don't understand. Like, how can you be so inhuman that you make this sort of argument? This argument that it's not on them to not do things that massively hurt others. It's on others to incentivize them not to do those things. It's just pure America brain. And then we had like another genius who responded saying like, do you honestly expect people to choose generational poverty for them and their children as opposed to joining the military? This is just like, I'm not specifically responding to these people to own them as individuals. They're nameless morons and commenting on YouTube. But they are making very common zero IQ arguments against what I'm saying here. And this is an opportunity for me to just put in the responses to that to close all possible avenues to response. Because these comments, when I clip this, they're going to be full of people saying these sorts of things that have already been dealt with in the video. So I responded to this saying, do we expect you not to be a heinous imperial hitman and do literally anything else? Yes, I profit from it is a totally ludicrous justification already debunked multiple times in these same comments. You would never apply this same logic to anything else. Do you honestly expect me to choose generational poverty rather than to rob someone for their life savings and throw their corpse into a river? Yes. Do you honestly expect me to choose generational poverty over joining the military voluntarily, going to Iraq, helping to destroy the country, resulting in the misery of tens of millions, and shooting at children for pay and benefits? Yes, these are not difficult moral lines not to cross, unless of course you are American apparently. And this guy responded to me saying, bad empanada, rejecting material analysis for moralization. What a time to be alive. And this is where we get to there's no free will. I have no choice here. I have no choice but to join the military, therefore it's wrong to say this to me. And my response here is, you're not engaging in material analysis. You're conflating simply having some sort of material motivation with a complete absolution of any personal choice, any personal responsibility. I was poor and I wanted the money can explain, for example, being driven to starring in a porn film, which might hurt you, but doesn't particularly hurt anyone else. It can also explain why you murdered your neighbor and stole his life savings, which very clearly harms many others very directly. These things are not the same just because they were motivated by the same circumstance, nor have they ever been considered the same in any society ever, communist or capitalist, nor do you even consider them the same yourself, except in this limited circumstance when it comes time to absolve American soldiers for doing anything. Germans had motivations for carrying out the Holocaust. I can talk about these perfectly fine without apologizing for them. Many Germans wanted nice houses. They wanted nice big houses with farmland, something they could probably never get themselves otherwise. They were still responsible for participating in the Holocaust, and it was good when they were evicted. They deserved to be evicted. No one forced them to move into those houses. They chose to do so at the expense of the genocide of Jewish and Polish people. They were still responsible for their participation, even though they had material motivations for what they did, beyond just, some sort of inexplainable hatred. So it's genuinely unhinged to use materialism as some sort of buzzword that absolves everyone of any possible act, acting like free will does not exist and that having a limited spectrum of choice means that you do not bear any responsibility for choices made. Like we can say, for example, that a bourgeois has understandable material motivations for what they do. They want, because it's just within their selfish interest to do so. Does that mean that they are completely absolved of moral culpability for exploiting people day in and day out in order to maintain their zero work bourgeois lifestyle? Of course it doesn't. Of course it's still responsible for that. Just because it's understandable, just because there's material motivations behind it, doesn't mean that they're not culpable for it. It's unhinged to use materialism as some sort of buzzword that absolves everyone of any possible act, acting like free will does not exist and that having a limited spectrum of choice means that you do not have any choice or bear any responsibility for choices made. This guy doesn't remotely believe that himself. No one believes it. Only when it comes time to make excuses for imperial soldiers to maintain some semblance of the American exceptionalist mythology do they pretend to, because it hurts them and their ingrained and apparently insurmountable sense of Western exceptionalism, where they just have to find some sort of roundabout way to absolve themselves or their countrymen specifically. That's what this is all about. This is like a more extensive and refined version of an argument that I've made before on my second channel, and I wanted to cover in a video as well, while also dealing with in advance of a lot of the idiotic counter-arguments that these people have. I'm totally fine with people who were in the US military becoming leftists, or the Israeli military, becoming anti-colonial or whatever, provided that they understand that what they did was wrong and they don't sugarcoat it. They don't try to frame themselves as victims. They don't try to make excuses for it. They understand that they did terrible things that hurt other people, and they shouldn't like use that experience as some sort of positive thing about them that makes them more qualified or like more important than others. It's something that should never ever be brought up except in a very limited array of circumstances where it might somehow be relevant. So they certainly shouldn't identify it. They certainly shouldn't make that like a core facet of their identity and identify as such constantly. Okay? Very simple. This is a very simple thing to ask people, and if they cannot abide by these very simple conditions, I'm not sure how you could ever, like, even remotely think of yourself as an ally of the people in the third world who are the very real victims of US imperialism that people like this participate in, willingly so. Going up to some Iraqi and being like, I'm your ally, friend, should come with some sort of, with like an acknowledgement that, you know, hey man, I never should have come to your country and done what I did. I'm so sorry for that. And I'm extremely remorseful for it, unequivocally. No caveats, no sort of absolution of personal responsibility. That's the prerequisite. And if you can't pass that point, you can't acknowledge that you did something wrong and that you shouldn't be throwing around this thing that you did wrong as some sort of cudgel against everyone else that makes you a special fucking snowflake, then you haven't even remotely gotten to the point where anyone else outside of these Western hegemonic faux leftist communities, where anyone outside of those people could ever acknowledge you as anything remotely resembling their ally.